As far back as I can remember, I always wanted to be a gangster.
There's no crying in baseball!
I ate his liver with some fava beans. A nice cliente.
That was totally wicked!
If I can change, and you can change, everybody can change!
And welcome to another episode of Your Next Favorite Movie. I am your host, Josh G. And today we are continuing Film Effectvember. And please help me welcome Andrew to the show.
Greetings and salutations, ladies and gentlemen. Hope you all having a good day.
I can't speak for everyone, but I'm all right myself. So how you doing?
I'm doing well. I actually just woke up early this morning to get this going. And I was up kind of late last night recording a podcast with the rest of the fewer cast members. So good times.
Yeah. Well, and after this, I'll be going to bed. So that's where I'm at because I work a completely different schedule than most people.
Yeah, from what I've been told.
Yeah. All right. So why don't you give your spiel? Tell everyone what they can expect when they tune into the Film Effect podcast and specifically what they can expect when they tune into your episodes, because I know you're not on all of them.
Well, I'm not as knowledgeable as the rest of the Film Effect crew, but I do have, kind of deep passion for movies the way that Ed does, because I grew up, entertained by a lot of them. I'm a big history guy. I really like old movies and whatnot. So I guess I have a different perspective from that. I don't really watch a whole lot of like very new age films or anything like that, but I kind of give my input from, I guess, past tense in a way. But I grew up watching like Sci-Fi Channel and horror films like that, and really big into like Orson Welles and Ed Wood from the 1950s and so on and so forth. So
okay, I was going to ask you what your definition of old films were, but there you go. There you go. That defines
like
that.
the old RKO before Universal bought them out, stuff like that. So
oh, okay. And why don't you give the spill on what they do because I know you're on quite a bit of the fewer cast anyway.
That's a weekly podcast where we break down what is going on currently in Hollywood, politically speaking, and behind the scenes of films, talking about films that are coming out, our personal opinions on them, so on and so forth. So it's kind of like a freestyle every week, which is more my tempo because I can at least keep up with that. You know what I mean?
And for anyone out there wondering, I can tell you this: Andrew's famous for recommending movies that he's never seen before.
Yes. I don't even remember how that joke came about, but it was like one of the first episodes of Fewercast. I was trying to sell Sean on a movie, and then like at the end of it, I was like, by the way, I've never seen this film. It just looks good.
Oh, that is crazy. All right, let's get into this week's movie. You're taking me back. I'd seen this years ago, but I needed to revisit. I'm glad I did and hopefully you can speak on some of the truer fact nature of it because I'm not positive about that. But before we get there, let's just get into it. We're going back to 2001. We're going to be talking about Blow.
We were young, rich, and in love. It was perfect.
There are few people in life
That's the import-export thing in Miami.
who get to have it all.
I know what you're up to.
Where did you get this stuff?
Colombia.
And even fewer
I bring you in, this is how you pay me back?
who get to keep it.
Look, George, this is business.
I'm great at what I do, Dad.
You'd be great at anything. Blow, rated R. Starts Friday.
All right, so when did you first see this?
So I was a little bit late to the party. I probably saw this in like 2005, 2006. I believe it was a fall 2001 film. And I saw it in the back room of my buddy Colin's house. My buddy Drew introduced me to it, actually. And at the time, I wasn't like a giant Johnny Depp fan, but I really liked Pirates of the Caribbean. I really liked his real life performances, such as Donnie Brasco, Donnie Brasco, Ed Wood. Ed Wood's another one. I know we just talked about Ed Wood, but that's like one of my favorite Johnny Depp films. So, he was on a nice little pace of a role going on, and Blow just happened to be one of those films that I didn't see at the time. So, very glad that a few years later I went back and caught up with it.
Well, I think I was later than you. I think the first time I watched it was probably 10 years ago. So I was later than you to that party. So for anyone that doesn't know, actually, I guess tell everybody what Blow is, what it's about.
So Blow is, I would say, inspired by and not necessarily based on, but it's inspired by the events of George Young. George Young is a cocaine trafficker from the 1970s and 80s. Got really big because he hooked up with Pablo Escobar, who was like the leader of the biggest cartel in Mexico. And they even quoted in the film, I think they said there was like an 85% chance if you were doing cocaine in the 1980s, it came from them, to kind of put into context how much, cocaine he was pushing at the time. So that's what the movie's about. The movie's about, the life and times of him as a cocaine dealer, but also the relationship between him and his, well, we'll say kind of crazy-ish wife.
Yeah, that about sums it up. So you mentioned it. You said inspired by. So have you looked up the story of George Young? Because I have not.
I did, yeah. When I was younger and I saw this film, I just immediately became entranced by the story. So I didn't read any like autobiographies, but at the time, that's when like the internet was getting real big. So I just kind of dug into it a whole lot of like, old newspaper articles and so on and so forth, just trying to get the real deal behind it. And it's actually not as interesting as the movie is, but he basically, and I'll get into it in a moment, but he went to jail for probably like 10 years maybe when he did the cocaine bid, but he got out and he went back to jail because he received a shipment of marijuana in 1994, I want to say it was, at his Cape Cod home. So obviously he didn't put the life behind him, even though he basically got out sky-free for the things that he was doing.
And did not learn, huh?
I mean, I guess when you're making that much money, it's hard to learn, but
That's probably true. I wouldn't know. I would have no idea.
I was gonna say I wouldn't know. I would never put myself in that position. But at the same time, like, I guess if I had to put my perspective into someone else's shoes, it is kind of hard to walk away from millions of dollars on a daily basis.
That's fair. So what is it about this? Why is it you wanted to bring this? What keeps you coming back to it? Put it that way.
I think it's overall Johnny Depp's performance, and I just don't know. It's one of those films that I'm just really nostalgic for. Like I said, I love history and I love movies that are like inspired or based on true stories. And this one's just fun. It's a fun film to sit down and watch. You have a ball with Boston George and his crazy antics. So that's probably what keeps me coming back. So I've probably seen this film, 50 times or something like that. And that might even be an understatement.
Okay. I also say it's got a great soundtrack on it too.
Yes, it does. And, I love how it starts out with Rolling Stones, and it's just some of the music. I love 70s rock music in particular. So just hearing some of these tunes just kind of gets you going.
Okay. So on the show, we don't get deep into the movie. I think you guys have covered this, right, on the Film Effect?
Yes, we have. Actually, if I'm not mistaken, it was the first film that I did on the podcast. I did it with Ed and Sean.
Okay.
So a little over a year ago. So you could find that in the archives.
Yeah. So if you want to hear the deep dive, because that's what they do over there, they do the deep dive. Go check that out. Russ over here, we keep it a little spoiler free, but this next question, I'm curious to see where you're going to go with this. Because this, like you said, it's inspired by true events. So if this movie was to get a sequel, how would you tackle that? Because I'm not sure. And you can go back to the early 2000s and bring everybody back. It's not like we'll get to the remake part next. Just a true sequel to this. Where would you take it?
I would take it with him getting out of jail, and kind of, obviously it would all have to be made up stuff because he denied a lot of the allegations about being a dealer again. I think he did a 15-year bid, which was even longer than the first bid, more or less, because when you get out of jail, you have all these charges that are still pending. If you go back to jail, then all of these charges come back up. So I feel like that's what he did the 15-year bid for. But I would probably put it in the perspective of, him getting out. And obviously, like I said, it would all have to be very fictitious because nothing is written in stone about this end of the story. But, just kind of have, and I'll get to who my actor is because funny enough, I have an actor that I wanted to portray older George, but it'd be basically that, and maybe even his jail time, like telling a little bit of stories of him being in jail, a little bit more than they did at the end of Blow. You know what I mean?
Okay. Well, you hinted at it. Let's get into who you put as some of these roles, because I was curious because listening to I forgot what episode you guys did recently. But you guys did top 5 biopics, and you love Johnny Depp in a biopic. So I was curious how you were going to tackle this because he seems to be your go-to guy when it comes to these type of movies.
I'm pretty sure he's on 4 out of my 5 on that list.
So there you go.
Honestly, when it comes to young George, like if we were to replace him in a modern day actor for Blow in particular, I don't know. It's weird. I immediately had an actor that came to mind for older George if we made a sequel. But if I had to pick a modern day actor for George now, it would probably be Brad Pitt, honestly. More or less because I feel like Brad Pitt has this style to him and this suave where he could just slick his hair back and immediately throw his mind state into that role of being like a lucrative drug dealer that thinks everything he's doing is right. You know what I mean? So I'd probably pick Brad Pitt as far as, that goes for Blow. But if we made a sequel, I want Gary Oldman to be Old Man George. Like Gary Oldman just looks like George Young did not before his death, but over the past like 15, 20 years. Like that's exactly what George Young looked like. So if you want to know what older George Young looked like, look at some of the pictures of Gary Oldman. And that's basically what it looks like.
Oh, wow. Interesting. I didn't know. I haven't looked at him, so I didn't know that. All right. Did you have anybody else like, oh my goodness, what's the wife's name?
God, I don't remember what her name is. I feel terrible, but I don't remember what her name is. I know it's Penelope Cruz.
Right. I remember the actress, and I remember his daughter being Christina. I just can't remember her name.
Yeah. God, I don't know who would portray her, but like as far as Diego goes, and it's funny because we were just talking about this last night, me and Corey, but Adrian Pascal is actually who I would pick as Diego. I think that dude is having a fire career right now, and I think it would just work out very well.
Are you talking about Pedro Pascal?
Oh, yes, my bad.
Pedro okay, I just
Pascal.
want to make sure if there might have been an Adrian Pascal.
No, Pedro. Yeah, you're right.
Okay.
He's the dude who's playing Joel in The Last of Us HBO show, and also he was in The Mandalorian. But God, I can't think of anybody to be Martha. Martha, honestly.
Got Martha. There you go. Well, he came up with her name at least.
Yeah, it's a good question. I don't really have anybody off the top of my head.
How about for Derek? Because I had forgotten that Paul Rubens is even in this movie.
Derek for real. Honestly, and this might sound weird, but bear with me. I would throw some makeup and maybe even a wig on Tom Holland. And I would probably have him be like a very sporadic character, much like the way that Pee Wee Herman handled it.
Yeah. I mean,
and maybe I'm having a different imagery in my head than most, but yeah, I would probably do that because I think Tom Holland is really good as like a methodical actor when need be.
No, I agree with that. Yeah, other than his youth, which you could make him up to look a little older, so it could work because he could definitely pull off the acting part of the role.
Well, that's the thing. Derek for real in the film is supposed to be like mid to late 20s. He just
okay.
He just looks older because it's Paul Rubin playing
right.
Him, but he's supposed to be like a kind of a younger fella,
Oh, well, in that case, yeah, I think you're okay with it. I didn't realize that. Like I said, I didn't look up the true story, so there you go.
Yeah, so
I was thinking
it's funny though because that Pee Wee Herman, Paul Rubin looks exactly like Derek for real in real life. Like, that's what he looks like, honestly.
So
because he's a very flamboyant guy, so like all the makeup that he's got on him, the cadence that he has, like that's Derek. So
Okay. All right. Well, that's simple then. I didn't realize that. So there you go. This is why I like bringing people when it's their favorite, because they know all this stuff that I'm not gonna know.
sure. I mean, and again, these all come from like interviews because they didn't. It's not like they were recording each other back in the day. But yes, the way that he like handles himself, that's very Paul Rubens.
So there we go. All right, Andrew, this is what I want you to do. I want you to give that final pitch on why someone who maybe hasn't seen Blow, maybe they should go back and give it another shot. Maybe they haven't seen it in a while, why they should revisit it. Give that final pitch.
My final pitch for Blow is if you're intrigued by true stories, if you're intrigued by, I guess, criminal enterprises in a way, this isn't exactly like an all-out gangster film or anything like that, but it's more of like a touching side of a dark history. Obviously, you know, most people have probably heard of El Padrón, which is, you know, Pablo Escobar, but this tells more of a story of his trafficking, but more or less the people around him, not just George Young, but, you know, Diego, Derek for real, so on and so forth. And it does a really good job of telling a true story, a sinister story at that, but it kind of makes it more apologetic for an American audience or just an audience in general. Because obviously, you know, you're telling a story about dealing drugs, like a lot of gunshots, a lot of death, a lot of misery, so on and so forth. But this isn't really about that. This is more about, you know, like the hard times of being a dealer and the emotional stress that he goes through, especially in the second half of the movie. So I think it's a great film because, again, Johnny Depp does an extremely well job of portraying real life people. And I have no idea why. He just does. He nails it. So if you've never seen Blow, it's definitely my favorite Paul Rubens performance. Not that that's really saying a whole lot, but it's definitely my favorite Johnny Depp performance as well. And despite Penelope Cruz being like completely unhinged and really annoying in some scenes, she really does bring this like kind of all together for him, especially toward the end. So yeah, I highly recommend it. It's one of my favorite films ever, and I've went back and watched it quite a few times, to say the least.
I got that. So there we go. I think that's gonna wrap this one up. Why don't you tell everybody where they can find you, where they can find the podcast, you know, all that good stuff.
I don't really do Twitter too much, but my Twitter handle is @BirdNastay. That is NASTAY. But again, I don't really use Twitter too much. So you can more or less find me on Facebook. You know, I'm on Instagram. My name's Andrew Perry Snyder if you're interested in looking around for that. And of course, more or less, you could find me on the Film Effect podcast once a week on Fewercast, where we do you know, kind of a chilled out hour to an hour and a half weekly roundup, if you will, of all things Hollywood and, you know, the politics of it, the movies, what's coming out, and what our opinions on it are. So if you want to have a good time for an hour and a half, catch us on Fridays.
All right. And as always, you can follow the show @ynfmoviepod. Most active on Twitter, actually, where a lot of the podcasts are. Easiest thing to do, go to linktr.ee/ynfmoviepod. It'll have all the podcast platforms, social media, YouTube channel, my personal letterbox, so you can see what I'm watching that's not being discussed on the show. And be sure to come back next week as we'll be joined by Justin, and he'll tell you why The Last Dragon should be your next favorite movie. Till then, you guys take care, and I'll talk to you next time.